So the final steps to getting our login page working is to actually be able to handle that data that's coming back to the server. So as we talked in the previous video, you can see when we type in a username and a password, I'm going to hit login. From our inspector, from the developer tools, we can look at our network traffic, click on login, and we can actually see that form data from our form being sent back to the server. The server ignores it and just reloads the page. But we have all of that data here. And we'll see here in our response, the response data that we're sending back helps us to identify that it's making it to the server successfully. We'll see here that we're hitting an IIS server, version 10. The server's running ASP.NET 4 as its core version engine. We're running ASP.NET MVC version 5.2, powered by ASP.NET, and there's some source file references. So all of this data is here to tell us we're making it to the server and we're coming back again. The status code 200 is the HTTP response status code that also tells us that everything is okay. Things like redirects would give us a different status code. I'll actually show you that by going to just account. So if you remember previously, we actually set up in our controller a redirect on the index action, and it redirects the login. So what that looks like on the browser side of things is that we will have a redirect. So I'm going to clear this out, and I'm going to navigate to /account. So you'll see here that we navigate to /account. This is our request. There's no form data because we're doing a GET in this case. And then the response that comes back, this is the header, and it comes back as a status 302, found. And the found 302 means that the response is actually to be redirected to another page. And in the response header, we see a location of account/login. So that's causing that browser redirect to go from account to account/login. So the browser actually reads that 302, it sees that new URL, and then it creates another GET request to the login. And then at that point, we get a 200 OK response. So that's how that redirect piece works from within the context of the browser. All right, so how do we get the form data piece working? So we'll go ahead and close our developer tools from Chrome, and we'll go ahead and minimize our browser. Now, within our account controller, let's stop our debug. Within the account controller itself, we actually have this action. This action currently is serving both the HTTP GET and the HTTP POST requests. We want to stop that. So to do that, we can add what's called an attribute to the method. To do that, you use square brackets, and then these are basically classes that we're going to decorate our method with. And one of them is called method get. Or I'm sorry, it's get, HTTP get. They've actually changed them from versions, so I always get them a little mixed up. So we're going to mark this as HTTP get. So now if we save it and we do a rebuild, you can go up here to hit play, and I'm going to go ahead and right click, inspect, pull up my inspector tools. I'm going to go ahead and go to the network traffic side, and I'm going to put in Kevin1 and password and hit login. I just realized that this button says login in. We need to fix that. Alright, so let's go ahead and reload that page. So that'll just say login. Alright, if you notice I didn't have to recompile, I just had to change it, save it, and then come back and refresh. So we'll do Kevin1 and password. I would blame everyone who is listening to this video, but you guys are not watching this as I'm recording it, unlike a face-to-face class, so I will give you all a break. Alright, so anyway, Kevin1 password. So I click login, and a few things will happen. We're going to end up getting an error on our page. And the reason for that is if we come in here and look, our form data is getting sent, our request is getting handled, but there's nothing to handle the post back. And because there's no action now to handle the post back, because we decorated that action in our controller as doing HTTP GET only, it will only handle GET requests. So there's nothing to handle the post. So it doesn't know how to get back. So what we need to do is we now need to create a method that handles this post method. And once we have that in place, this will get processed correctly and we'll get some output. So let's build that. So we'll go ahead and close down that, flip back, and we'll stop debug. All right. So the first thing we'll do is we need to create another action, and we're going to actually give it the same name because it's still the login action, it's just handling a different set of requests. And we're going to flag this as the HTTP post action. Now, this action signature is going to be different than this action signature, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, they have to be different because right now we have two methods with the same name, the same return value, and the same parameter collection. And because they're the same, the compiler is like, nope, can't do it. You can't have two with the same name. It just doesn't jive. And that's fine, because with the post, we're expecting data to be coming back to us, right? We need a username and a password. So inside of our parameter parentheses, we're going to put in two input parameters to this function, and they're going to be called username and password. So string username, string password. So what ASP.NET MVC will do is that when that post happens and that form data is sent to us, it will actually take those two input parameters that come across the query string, or actually the post data, and it will take them out and it will put them into these parameters when it calls the login method. So that call will pick up those values, Kevin1 and password, and put them into these variables. All right. So the second part is we need to actually process. Now typically we would do something like validate a username and password is passed. Basically we're checking for no empties. Then we would open the database connection. We would query for user based on username and password. If invalid, send error, valid, redirect to maybe like the user profile. Actually, in this step, we would also hash password, and then we would check the password hash. And we'll talk more about that in later lectures. So there's a lot of steps here. For right now, we're not going to implement any of them because we haven't covered how to do any of that stuff yet. And that would take another set of probably 5 or 6 videos. So for this week's lecture, we're just going to kind of make this real simple. So we're going to just simply return, and we're going to use one of these different return types. And instead of returning a view, we're going to return content. And content is basically string data that we're going to send back to the user. And we're going to say, hello, username, welcome to our application. Right? Not very exciting, but it shows that we're getting that postback data from the browser back to the server, and we can actually do something with it. Alright, so we now have our action, and we have a response. We're sending something back, because if we didn't actually respond with anything, we would still end up with like a 400 error because we're not actually sending a response back, which doesn't make any sense. So either we would redirect to a different page, or we would do some sort of action to notify the user that yes, you logged in and you actually got something. I've had cases where students have created these pages and they don't send anything back, so then after I log in, I don't really know if I'm logged in or not. I don't see a username in the address bar, I don't even see a navigation page, so things get a little abstract with some of these systems that I've seen. So make sure that you at least send back a response. More ideally, put them into a point of action where they can actually do something with the website. Alright, so we set that up. I'm going to hit the play button, recompile, and then we will redeploy. So we will navigate to account, which will redirect us to the account/login. I'm going to go ahead and open up my inspector again. Now, the inspector is not necessary, but I like to kind of watch the traffic the first time and make sure everything is working and walking and talking the way I expect. So we'll do Kevin1 and password, and we'll click login. And we get hello Kevin1, welcome to our application. So if we look in here, we can see that our form data is being sent, and obviously it's being picked up because it's showing us our name in the page. So let's see what's happening on the server side. So let's flip this back over this way. Go back one. I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, and I'm actually going to put a breakpoint right here on line 39 for me. This is the return content line. So if you click in the gray space to the right of your line numbers, you'll put a dot, and that is a breakpoint. So that when you're running your code with debug enabled, you can actually navigate and you'll see what happens when you click buttons. So we'll click login again. The debugger inside of Visual Studio picked up that request, so that HTTP post that gets sent. And if we mouse over each one of these properties, we can say the username, password 1, and then my password string of password is being passed in. So this line of code then does a string concatenation of these pieces together and results in that output message that we're seeing. So return that content. That content that's returned is then the web page data. Now, if we look at this content return from an HTML perspective, I'm just going to view the page source. It literally is nothing more than that single line of text. There's no HTML tags, no body tags, nothing. It's just that text. So that's why I kind of warned before about don't just send text, and make sure you don't not send anything, because sending just a blank page doesn't mean anything, doesn't do anyone any good. Even looking at this, great, I'm logged in, but what can I do? Well, since our app doesn't do anything right now, you can't do anything. So we're where you want you to be. But longer term, we want to make sure that we actually redirect to, a profile page or some place that the user can do actions. So this is the first steps of doing post back. We can take data and we can post it back. If you want, go ahead and try adding additional query string parameters in here and see how they come and go. You can add additional input tags as well, so you can do things like text areas, checkboxes, all of those different things, and they correspond pretty well to their given type. So things like checkboxes, those come in as actual Boolean values, true, false. Radio buttons, those come in typically as string values. If you're returning a number, you can actually declare your input parameter as an int, and then ASP.NET will actually do a cast of that value to a number. I will warn you, if you do that and you're not receiving a number, it will crash because it can't convert a string into a number. So there's things to keep in mind and be aware of. But you've now done a post back of your code from the form back to your controller, and that essentially closes the loop of how your application will function. You'll start out with a method that does an HTTP GET that will generate a view, a web page. That web page will then probably most likely have a form or a particular link that does an action. That action will then call either another controller action, or it will do a post back, which will then get picked up by a post back action, and then it'll process further. So in next week's video, we'll talk more about processing post back and how you can actually use classes inside of your input parameters. So instead of listing string username, string password, we could put a user object here inside of our input parameters with a username and password property, and then be able to actually capture and deal with it as a single object. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions, as always, post them to the Slack or email or whatever works for you, and hopefully those that will definitely give you a good start and a good foundation to building any ASP.NET MVC application.